The story begins with a team of medics treating soldiers wounded in one of the battles of World War I. Among them is a French officer who has been shot 3 times. But when the doctor begins removing the bullets from his abdomen, he discovers 4 bullets instead of 3. The shocking part is that the 4th bullet isn't German at all, it appears to be made of silver. The story then flashes back to the late 19th century, about 35 years earlier. We're introduced to Baron Seamus Laurent, who lives with his wife, Isabel, and their 2 children, Charlotte and Edward. One day, a group of Romani travelers arrives near their estate in horse-drawn wagons and sets up camp, expecting a powerful storm to hit the area. Among them is a Romani woman named Florence. She hands a handful of silver coins to another Romani man named Theodore, and asks him to make something special out of them. Theodore melts the silver and forges it into a horrifying set of long silver fangs. Florence places the silver teeth on a sacred altar. That same night, Charlotte and Edward become curious about what the adults are discussing. They secretly listen in and discover the conversation is about the Romani people who have settled nearby and are claiming ownership of certain lands. The local priest admits that official records actually support the Romani claim, but he argues that documents can easily be forged. He then suggests hiring mercenaries to drive the Romani people off the land, even if it means using violence. The next morning, the wealthy landowners, led by Seamus, head to the Romani camp to carry out the plan. Negotiations barely last a minute before the first gunshot is fired. The Romani people suddenly find themselves surrounded with nowhere to escape. The barons mercilessly gun them down and set their tents on fire, turning the entire camp into a massacre. As if that weren't enough, they even stop to pose for a celebratory photograph after wiping out the innocent camp. Florence and Theodore are captured, and the mercenaries seize the silver teeth. One of Seamus's men mocks the Romani beliefs and insists they were trying to steal land that belonged to others. Although he's tempted by the valuable silver teeth, his hatred for the Romani is so great that he orders the teeth to be buried with their owner. Before that happens, Florence is forced to watch Theodore suffer a horrifying fate. His arms and legs are cut off, he's nailed to a cross, his head is covered with burlap, and he's raised in the middle of a field like a scarecrow. Then Florence herself is buried alive while screaming curses and clutching the box containing the silver teeth. Meanwhile, back at Seamus's mansion, Charlotte and Edward happily sing and play, completely unaware of the horrific massacre their father has just ordered. That night, Charlotte has a terrifying nightmare about the scarecrow in the field. She sees its head moving on its own before finding herself digging in the ground nearby. At the same time, a pathologist named Dr. John McBride arrives at the village tavern. He rents a room and asks the innkeeper whether any Romani people have been seen in the area. The innkeeper avoids answering and becomes suspicious of him. Shortly afterward, Lieutenant Alfred arrives, revealing that he and John have known each other for years. Alfred tries to find out why John has come to the village, but John carefully dodges the question. The following morning, Edward is practicing with his sword in the garden when he notices smoke rising in the distance. He follows it until he reaches the scarecrow, where he begins hearing the whispers of a woman's voice. Drawn by the mysterious whispers, he starts digging and uncovers the box containing the silver teeth. The moment he touches it, he's struck by a terrifying vision. He sees Florence suspended in the air as she suddenly rushes straight toward him. Just before she reaches him, Edward wakes up screaming, believing it was only a nightmare. But then he realizes he's actually standing outside in the garden, wearing only his pajamas in the middle of the night. The next day, a boy named Timmy tells Charlotte and the other children that he wants to show them something, but first he makes them swear not to tell anyone because Seamus might throw his family off the estate if he finds out. When they reach the scarecrow, Edward reminds everyone that the adults have forbidden children from going near it. Timmy replies that the place has been off limits ever since the fire. He then asks if they've all dreamed about the scarecrow, and everyone admits they've had the exact same nightmare. Ignoring his frightened friends, Timmy digs up the box and opens it. The instant he does, his hand begins shaking as though some dark force has taken control of him. He puts on the silver teeth, turns toward the others with a terrifying grin, and suddenly attacks Edward, sinking his new fangs into his neck. Charlotte sprints back to the house to warn the adults, who rush to the scene. They immediately call for the doctor. As soon as he enters the room, he complains about how dark it is, but Edward's mother explains that bright light hurts her son's eyes. After examining him, the doctor concludes that Edward was attacked by a wild animal, but Charlotte knows that can't possibly be true. That night, Charlotte has the same nightmare again. She wakes up after hearing a strange noise coming from Edward's bedroom. She rushes inside and finds him struggling to breathe, looking completely terrified. When she pulls back the blanket, she discovers that root-like growths have spread across his body. She screams for her parents. Seamus races into the room, only to find the bed empty. All that's left are bloodstains on the sheets. The front door is wide open, and Edward has vanished without a trace. Seamus immediately organizes a search party to comb through the forest. Charlotte grows anxious when she notices Timmy among the volunteers, but she decides to keep what she knows to herself. Despite searching everywhere, no one finds Edward, and Isabel is left completely devastated by the disappearance of her son. A few days later, Lieutenant Alfred knocks on Dr. John McBride's door and asks for his help investigating the disappearance of the young boy. He admits that a tragic incident involving the Romani people happened years ago, and he believes it may be connected to the current events. Meanwhile, at the church, Timmy asks Charlotte to speak with him privately. He tells her he can't remember anything that happened. Charlotte fills him in on everything and explains that none of the children told the adults the truth because they honored the oath they had sworn to keep it a secret. Timmy is visibly shaken. He begins reading passages from the Bible and tells Charlotte that the silver teeth were forged from the very silver coins Judas received for betraying Jesus Christ. He tears a page from the Bible, hands it to Charlotte, and says he left the silver teeth on the church's consecrated grounds. Even so, he fears it won't be enough to break the curse. He then says that every one of them will die to pay for the sins of their parents. Suddenly, the housekeeper opens the confessional door. Terrified, Timmy runs away, while Anne escorts Charlotte back home. As Timmy passes by the church, he thinks he sees Edward in the distance, shirtless. He chases after him, calling his name, until he suddenly realizes he's standing alone in the middle of the forest. Moments later, something begins rushing toward him. Before he can make out what it is, the creature flashes past him and slices off his arm. Horrified, Timmy staggers backward and desperately tries to hide, but the terrifying growls drawing closer tell him the monster has already found him. When Alfred and John arrive at Seamus's estate, Seamus tells them the situation has gotten much worse. He leads them to the cabin in the woods where Timmy had taken refuge. Alfred is horrified by what he sees inside and rushes back outside, struggling not to throw up. John enters the cabin himself and discovers Timmy's body torn to pieces. While examining the remains, he finds the torn Bible page in Timmy's pocket, with the passage about the silver coins underlined. After leaving the cabin, John publicly declares that the attack appears to have been carried out by a wolf. Alfred immediately decides to close Edward's missing person case as well. Seamus is stunned, but Alfred explains that the town is suffering from a devastating cholera outbreak, and they simply don't have the resources to continue the investigation. Despite that, John volunteers to keep investigating on his own, and Alfred has no objection. After Seamus shows John around the house and shares everything he knows, John advises him to board up all the first-floor windows as a precaution. He then decides to remain with the family. That night, John has a nightmare of his own involving the scarecrow. In the dream, he continues digging after finding the buried box and uncovers Florence's corpse. Then someone calls his name. He turns and sees a woman holding the hand of a young blonde girl. When he looks again, the scarecrow has vanished, only to reappear moments later in another part of the field, leading the woman and the little girl away into the darkness. John wakes up in a panic and lights a candle. By pure coincidence, he notices a photograph on the nightstand showing the very same woman and little girl from his dream. A short while later, he accidentally overhears Seamus arguing with his wife, Isabel. John realizes that both Isabel and Charlotte are emotionally shattered by Edward's disappearance, while Seamus seems more concerned with maintaining order and appearances than with anything else. The next morning, during breakfast, Charlotte suddenly asks, "Are we all going to die?" Her father immediately scolds her and forbids her from saying such things at the table. Later, John notices what appears to be a bloodstain on the door Edward escaped through. Once the house is empty, he scrapes off a sample and returns to his room. He cuts his finger with a razor to collect his own blood and compare it with the sample from the door. He discovers that the blood from the door has a stable composition, while his own blood contains an additional element that appears to be constantly moving. His experiment is interrupted by a muffled noise outside. John investigates and peers through the wooden boards covering the window, where he catches sight of a monstrous eye staring back at him. He immediately tells Seamus to grab his rifle, but by the time they open the door, the creature has already disappeared. John insists they gather a hunting party to track the monster down. Seamus summons the other barons, who aren't exactly thrilled about taking orders from an outsider. John explains that he was once involved in another infamous case known as the Beast of Gavaudan. The men are alarmed when they realize this situation could be just as dangerous. They ask whether they should call in the army. John agrees that it would help, but explains that the military won't intervene without solid proof that such a creature actually exists. The explanation convinces the barons, who order every villager to stay inside their homes and reinforce their windows with wooden boards until the monster is captured. The order doesn't last long. 3 local farmers ignore the warning. A young woman named Anne-Marie heads to the fields with her friends, Jacob and Callum, to finish some work, even though she's frightened and doesn't want to go. While they're there, they hear a strange noise. Callum grabs a thick tree branch and heads into the woods to investigate. Anne-Marie repeatedly calls after him, growing more terrified with every shout, but he never answers. Soon she begins hearing broken, guttural growls and senses something racing past her at incredible speed. She looks for Jacob and finds him slumped over a fence, staring blankly into space without responding. As she moves closer, she's horrified to discover a monstrous creature feeding on his body. She screams and tries to run, but the beast knocks her to the ground and begins attacking her as well. At the last second, Callum reappears and strikes the monster with the heavy branch, yelling at Anne-Marie to run. Blood splashes across her face. She crawls away until she finally finds the strength to stand and flee, knowing she's the only survivor. Her neighbors rush her inside and notify the authorities, but when investigators search the location she described, all they find are a few torn strips of fabric. John questions Anne-Marie about what attacked them, but everyone dismisses her story as delirium after she claims she saw a dragon. When John discovers that she was bitten as well, he insists on examining her immediately. Unfortunately, he's already too late. By the time he reaches her room, the window is wide open, bloodstains cover the bedsheets, and Anne-Marie has vanished. John warns Seamus that the situation is far more dangerous than anyone realizes. He orders everyone to take shelter inside the church, build barricades, and stay together, explaining that the villagers are being hunted down one by one. Meanwhile, Anne-Marie crawls through the forest as a horrifying transformation begins. She looks completely disoriented, unable to understand what's happening to her. Begging for water, she suddenly screams as strange roots begin growing from her back, the same roots that had appeared on Edward's body. The roots drag her toward the river and wrap tightly around her body, forming something that resembles a cocoon. That night, the villagers line up outside the church, following John's instructions to take shelter. While everyone prepares for the long night ahead, John sits down with Isabel and opens up about his past. He tells her that his wife and daughters were among the victims of the infamous Beast of Gavaudan. Ever since that tragedy, he has dedicated his life to investigating cases like this one. He then explains that a group of Romani people later appeared and revealed that the massacre had been caused by a curse from their people, and that the only way to stop it was with Romani silver. Isabel finally begins confessing the truth about the massacre her husband ordered against the Romani people, but Seamus arrives at that exact moment and angrily orders her to remain silent. The following morning, John heads out alone to set traps. As he passes the scarecrow, he notices the disturbed patch of earth nearby. After hours of exhausting work, painful memories begin flooding back into his mind. He snaps out of it only when he senses someone nearby. Spotting the creature entering the cabin, he stays alert, making sure not to fall into one of his own traps. The moment the monster bursts out of the cabin and attacks, John quickly jumps aside. The creature crashes directly onto the sharpened wooden stakes John had planted in the ground, impaling itself. John then drags the creature's body back to the village so he can perform an autopsy. Seamus and the others are stunned when they realize the creature is clearly not a wolf. Surprisingly, John doesn't seem shocked at all. He warns them that their mission is far from over before cutting open the monster's body. Suddenly, everyone recoils in horror as something begins moving inside its guts. A face covered in slimy mucus slowly emerges from a membranous cocoon. To everyone's shock, it's Anne-Marie. They watch as she struggles to crawl free, but John immediately stops anyone from touching her. He explains that victims of the curse are beyond saving and will never become human again. The only mercy they can offer is a quick death. Anne-Marie finally tears through the membrane and crawls out, screaming in unbearable agony, proving John was right all along. A single gunshot ends her suffering. Watching the scene unfold, Seamus is devastated as he realizes Edward must have gone through the exact same horrifying transformation. Losing his patience, John confronts Seamus and demands to know the identity of the woman who keeps appearing in everyone's dreams and who is buried beneath the scarecrow. Seamus refuses to answer. He insists he doesn't believe in curses and says his son was innocent. He also begs John not to tell Isabel what really happened to Edward. Instead, he vows to hunt down the monster himself, believing it's his responsibility to end this nightmare. Realizing there's no point arguing, John waits for Seamus and the hunters to leave before continuing his conversation with Isabel. She shows him the photograph taken on the day the Romani people were driven away. John tells her about the torn Bible page he found in Timmy's pocket, and explains that the key to solving the mystery is buried with the woman, and somehow connected to the silver coins. At last, Charlotte breaks her silence, at least partially. She shows John another page explaining that the silver used to forge the teeth came from the very same silver coins paid to Judas for betraying Jesus. She also reveals that Timmy hid the silver teeth inside the church confessional. John rushes to the church immediately. The moment he sees the silver teeth with his own eyes, he orders that the army be called without delay. Meanwhile, while Seamus and the other hunters wait for any sign of the creature, the housekeeper, quickly gathers the laundry hanging outside. She suddenly freezes in terror when she notices a pair of horribly deformed legs behind one of the sheets. As the wind blows the sheet aside, the monster is revealed standing only a few feet away. And tries to run, but the creature leaps onto her, splattering blood across the hanging laundry. After the monster leaves, she crawls back into the house and secretly treats her bite wound by herself. Back at the church, John melts down the silver teeth and forges them into 4 silver bullets. When Seamus returns from the unsuccessful hunt, furious and empty-handed, and has already regained her composure, she hides the fact that she was attacked and struggles to conceal her pain while serving dinner to the family. However, John notices the blood-stained sheets. He rushes inside and asks if anyone has gone missing, but Seamus cuts him off before he can say anything in front of Isabel. John breaks down and tells Seamus that everything happening now is the direct result of his actions. He reminds him that his own family was once destroyed by people just like him. Furious, Seamus orders John to leave his house, but John refuses, saying he'll wait outside for the army to arrive. Charlotte asks her mother to sleep beside her, while Seamus spends the night alone in his study. At the same time, and begins undergoing the same horrifying transformation inside her room. A short while later, Seamus hears strange noises coming from the air vent. He grabs his rifle and heads upstairs to investigate. At the same time, John walks into the kitchen to make some tea, leaving his rifle by the doorway. Anne's room looks exactly like the rooms of the previous victims. The bed is empty, the sheets are covered in blood, but the window remains locked. John realizes she's still somewhere inside the room. As he searches, he's suddenly attacked, and his candle falls to the floor. At that very moment, Isabel hears the tea kettle whistling in the kitchen. As she walks there, she notices Seamus is no longer in his study. She asks John if he's seen him, and just then, a gunshot echoes through the house. John discovers the burning creature collapsed in the middle of the room and immediately runs downstairs. Isabel screams, telling him that Seamus ran past her and out the front door. John warns her that the fire is spreading before chasing after Seamus. Meanwhile, Isabel searches for Charlotte, who has already hidden beneath the bed. When John finds Seamus inside the stable, Seamus reveals that he has been bitten. Rather than allow himself to transform, he sets himself on fire. At the same time, Isabel desperately tries to convince Charlotte to leave the house. Suddenly, they spot the creature climbing the stairs. They hide and wait for it to pass, but the flames quickly consume the entire house. At the last possible moment, they escape through the front door and reunite with John, who immediately leads them toward the church. On the way, John notices the creature following them. He orders Isabel and Charlotte to get down on the ground. Charlotte is horrified when she realizes one of the bodies lying nearby belongs to her grandmother. John fires the first silver bullet, successfully driving the monster back and giving the 3 of them enough time to reach the church safely. Inside the church, Timmy's father loses his temper after hearing that the plan is to wait for the army. He wants to go out immediately and take revenge on the monster. John explains that he has survived this long only because of the silver bullets. Since they have so few of them, they must wait until daylight to use them wisely instead of wasting them. Hours later, everyone is asleep except for Isabel, who remains awake praying for her son. Suddenly, she hears a voice calling from outside the church. She walks toward the door and hears Edward pleading for help, begging her to let him in. Overcome by grief and desperation, Isabel begins unlocking the church doors. The others wake up when they hear the noise, but they're too late to stop her. She stares into the thick fog outside, only to freeze in horror as the monster reveals itself. The men immediately open fire, but nothing can stop the creature as it crashes into the church, unleashing chaos and bloodshed. John fires the second silver bullet, but it misses its target. In the middle of the chaos, Isabel refuses to abandon her son. She is bitten by the monster, and with tears in his eyes, John asks her to forgive him before pulling the trigger one last time. The silver bullet passes through Isabel's body before striking the creature, which instantly transforms back into Edward. Both of them collapse onto the church floor. Edward slowly opens his eyes once again, but Isabel doesn't survive her injuries. After the horrific tragedy that unfolds inside the church that night, Edward remembers nothing of what happened. John adopts both Edward and Charlotte, giving them a chance to start over. In the film's final twist, we discover that Edward lives for another 35 years and grows up to become the very same French officer we saw dying on the battlefield at the beginning of the movie, bringing the story full circle. And that's the end of the movie. Thanks for watching. Don't forget that your opinion matters to us, so be sure to leave your thoughts in the comments and subscribe to the channel for more videos.